So we're going to have a very discussion-oriented format. I think of it more like popcorn than anything else, in that we'll be picking off of each other's ideas. My job as a moderator is kind of to help the river generally flow, but not to redirect it for the most part. We're going to start with John Brown here on the end, the President and Chief Technical Officer of CityLink Fiber in Albuquerque. You'll quickly find out he is very technical. I wanted to ask you the first question. You've already jumped the gun a little bit with Commissioner Clyburn talking about pole attachments. So I'd like you to elaborate on that very briefly. And in particular, I think Commissioner Clyburn responded with the sense that it was city permitting processes that were in the way. But my sense is that your problem with pole attachments actually go well beyond city issues. So if you could address that, please.
Certainly. Yes, our biggest single barrier to fiber deployment in Albuquerque today really comes down to the economics of fiber deployment. And as we all know, it's very economical to deploy on pole attachments. In 2015, when Chairman Wheeler pushed out the net neutrality rules, and I eagerly read through there and saw that we had Rule 224 privileges, which gave us, as a broadband provider, gave us the ability to have a legal right to attach to the poles. So I went to the two pole attachment or pole owners in our community, and I've asked them to engage and present contracts to us for pole attachment. Needless to say, I'm highly disappointed in the type of agreements that we got back. We've been very slowly spending lots of money on legal fees to try to get that pole attachment issues resolved. The biggest thing that comes up is that the pole owners are only willing to give us a 1-year agreement to attach fiber. And at the end of that 1 year, if there isn't a reason for us to be on the poles or a right for us to be on the poles, then we have to take our fiber down. I'm not sure of anybody here that is willing to help fund a fiber deployment when we only have a 1-year opportunity for a return on investment. So it's not been our city folks that have been an impediment to that deployment. It's actually been the pole owners that have been an impediment, and not recognizing the fact that today we have federal law that says we should be able to get on those poles.
Thanks, and we're going to be talking more about that issue, but we're doing a little introductory sort of questions to start. I want to move next to John Chambers, our John without an H, a partner with Conexon, former person, head of special projects with the FCC, a person who quite honestly is very sought after, and I think you'll see why. John, I want to start by asking you a question, which is, can we afford to have high-quality rural broadband access?
Thanks, Chris. The short answer is yes. I believe we as a nation can build fiber to the home, to every home in the country for less money than is being spent today, either through state or federal subsidies or other programs. The reason I say that has to do with my experience. As Chris mentioned, I was at the FCC for about 4 years, where I was the head of the Office of Strategic Planning. And during that time...
That sounds like special projects, my bad.
No, it's all right. During that time, the FCC reformed the High Cost Fund, reformed the E-rate program, reformed the Lifeline program, reformed the Telecommunications Relay Service program. So all of the $12 billion or so of federal spending was reformed. I'm now back to doing what I used to do and what I've done for most of my career, which is work with companies that are building broadband networks. I've been doing that since the early 1990s with cable operators here in Europe, with wireless companies, and now with rural electric co-ops building fiber to the home. And so I've spent some time with policy, and Chris and I have had this discussion. We'll talk, and he'll say, well, what policy is going to help with what you're trying to do? And I'll say, I'm not interested in policy. I'm just interested now in building networks. And to the extent I have to wait for some federal or state policy, my time's up. I don't have that time. I used to be a young man in a hurry. Now I'm an old man in a hurry. We build fiber to the home networks anywhere in the country, any population density. The prerequisite for us is we only work with one type of organization, which are membership organizations, because we think that's that's fundamentally the best way to do it in areas where it's hardest to build.
And when you say membership organizations, for the most part, that's been electric cooperatives.
Right. We stay in our lane, and our lane are rural electric cooperatives. For those of you who don't know, rural electric cooperatives cover about 3/4 of the geography of the country. So, it's a lot of territory, but we don't work with others. There's enough to do in the 3/4 of the geography of the country, particularly because those are, by definition, the areas that lack alternatives, lack broadband, in many cases even lack sort of 4.1 megabit per second service.
Great. So we're going to move on to another tall member of the panel, Matt Rantanen, who is the director of the tribal. I'm just going to read my notes. I try to do this without looking down. The director of the technology for the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. I thought that I could just remember it because I've been friends with Matt for a long time. Matt brings a wealth of experience with wireless and wired technologies to the panel and rural and tribal experiences. So I wanted to ask you the question, what's happening on tribal lands in your experience?
Well, I just wanted to kind of riff off of what John said. I embrace John's enthusiasm for fiber to the home everywhere. But I'm going to remind John that we don't have power to the home everywhere on the reservations, and plain old telephone service and things like that. So some of the barriers that John's going to find when he hits the reservations are that some of that other infrastructure isn't already in place. So working together, in solving that problem, I would love to see your dreams come to fruition. And
I support power to the home everywhere too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So on the reservations, like as I said, we have some situations where we don't have plain old telephone service. Upwards of 30% of the tribal members don't have the access to that. The shift has been to move to cellular coverage, and cellular coverage is not ubiquitous. We have a lot of gaps in our coverage, and then broadband becomes the key player in staying in touch with the rest of the world as fast as this world is moving. We are missing out on education opportunities, on job training, job search, doing homework at night. Our kids drive parents drive kids 45 minutes to McDonald's or to Starbucks to get access to Wi-Fi so the kids can do their homework at night, and then they have to drive back home. And that's not working for us. We need infrastructure on the ground in the reservations, and middle mile fiber is the missing component. A lot of tribes know what they're doing and can build a network internally, but if they don't have backhaul to the services or to the resources, then we don't have any access to what we need.
And our final panelist is Jory Wolf, who is currently the Vice President for Digital Innovations at Magellan, and comes to us previously, was one of the people at the launching of Next Century Cities, where he was the CIO of the city of Santa Monica. Jory, you are working now with many cities on solving these issues, and I wanted to ask you, coming from a more urban perspective, almost all of your clients have cable probably to just about everyone. They have some level of DSL, some have some fiber to some people. What's the problem?
The problem is that's an 80s and 1990s environment, and there is no competition. So the telco, the entrenched telco, is there and is not building and is not investing in fiber optics for the community to deliver anything over a DSL circuit, and at best turbo DSL is 6 meg, but more than likely it's 1.5 to 3. A cable modem service is at best 60 meg, depending upon the technology, obviously. But we're talking about a stranglehold on a community that you've just mentioned. And there has to be some sort of incentives for competition. And communities like that need to wake up that they will not have a broadband future until they look at either building it themselves organically, using public works projects, grant opportunities, and also through public-private partnerships and incentivizing service providers, new entrees into their communities to create a competitive environment.
Thank you. I just want to note, I think you were talking about the cable modem experience in a lot of the cities you're working with. To just clear, I don't want to upset any incumbents because we do not have any on stage, but we do see cable modem services well in excess of that. And we see DOCSIS being able to do a gigabit download with much slower uploads. We see DSL that can reach to 40 megabits a second download in a number of areas. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear on the technology. Also wanted to make one final housekeeping note, which is that I'm very aware that we have 5 men on the stage. It is the year 2017. In trying to pull an event like this together, it's very challenging, and I am sorry that I was not able to offer more diversity, but I can't tell you how excited I am for the experiences that everyone on this stage has to share. So I just wanted to note that rather than seeing angry tweets about it. So one of the things I wanted to wrestle with, I think, just quickly is particularly from the rural and tribal perspective, I've heard some people get frustrated at talk of competition, which is a value of Next Century Cities. And which reminds me, I'm the policy director for Next Century Cities. I didn't introduce myself. Chris Mitchell, and was one of the people that helped to pull Next Century Cities together and try to offer a little bit of guidance within my role within the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I do broadband, actually, I think I've interviewed all of you on my podcast. So if you're really annoyed at my voice, you can download that to get your blood pumping even more. But I want to talk about competition, and I wanted to ask, is this idea of focusing on competition misplaced from your perspective, whether that's from a perspective of just the challenges of dealing in a field that has some natural monopoly characteristics, or because you're just looking for one really good provider as it is right now? So I think we all have comments on that. John, I'd love to start with you.
I don't think it's misplaced. That is, does competition drive innovation? Does it drive quality of service? And will it do that in rural areas as well? We don't build into any area where we're the only provider. We face competition everywhere we build. So it's a natural, it's a natural aspect of providing service today, unless you're the incumbent monopoly and nobody else is coming in. I think the time has long passed when we should consider any type of telecommunications or information service, broadband service, to be a natural monopoly. The area where I wish competition was used as a policy to drive improved infrastructure, improved services, is to take the $4.5 billion that the federal government spends every single year and apply competitive principles to that, which is to say, allow for the money flows. So isn't that $4.5 billion year in, year out the FCC has spent every year, has collected that much money every year for the past decade, intends to collect that much money and spend that much money for the next decade, and the money all flows to one type of company. I don't think the federal government should be spending its money on a particular technology, on a particular service provider. I think the federal government should allow all of that money, and it's a substantial amount of money, to flow to the consumer choice of the service that consumers want. I think if you did that, it is allowed for, in a rural area, if somebody wants to choose satellite, if somebody wants to choose fixed wireless, if somebody wants to choose a fiber to the home service or DSL or anything else, that the subsidy that today flows to that area should flow to the company providing the service. I think that's where competition can be used. There's a lot of money spent in rural America. Commissioner Clyburn was talking about that when she was saying 27 times as much money is spent on a rural home as it is on a poor household for broadband. I think if you allowed that money to flow to consumer choice, you would have competition not in the abstract, you would have actual competition for the money, which would lead to competition for services. Sorry for the speech.
I'll step in and say that competition in our region would be brilliant because we, 7 of our tribes are based in a valley that is completely controlled by AT&T, and there's no leasing dark fiber, there's no access to any other services, and nobody else is seeing an ROI in competing with AT&T in that valley. So we're kind of trapped with those services. We have had the benefit of working with, and it's weird to say that because tribes usually don't have a good relationship with CenturyLink in San Diego County after they bought the Quest network. And we have a connectivity that just lit 2 weeks ago in East County, San Diego. And we are now able to have fiber access in the East County to have a redundant system so we don't have a single point of failure. We're very excited about that. We went to AT&T, we went to all the other providers down there, and nobody would even open the door to opportunities for local access to fiber. The CenturyLink link lit. It took us an inordinate amount of time to get it done because of a public utility problem or utility provider problem. But once it lit, I then found out that all the other providers have opened up local access to fiber in that region because they're all freaking out that there now is a big provider in there offering services, and they didn't think it was a community that would benefit from it. So competition's huge. It's changed the landscape in southeast San Diego County.
Chris, I think competition is vitally important to any community. If I look at what we've done in Albuquerque 10 years ago when we started, there was no open access dark fiber provider. We showed up, we started up providing open access dark fiber, and all of a sudden, literally within 2 years, we had a number of other national carriers coming into town using our fiber to get to the long haul, because we're the only guy that was tied in as an open access provider to the long haul network. So now that gave them an opportunity to pop out and actually serve Albuquerque. We track the per megabit price that we've seen drop over a 10-year period. We've gone in our community from $50 to $70 per megabit down. As we heard earlier today with Kimball, she's now paying $3 a meg. And there's other opportunities in Albuquerque where that price is even lower available today for bandwidth. So the competition is vitally important. It wakes up the other providers. It gets everybody going, hey, wait a minute, if I want to win that deal, I've got to be at that price point. How do I get to that price point? So whether it's competition that we're using from a policy perspective or it's just a natural market function, I think competition is vitally important to the success of everybody in that community.
And can you just go
From
ahead, Matt.
$90 to $2.82.
Say that again. You're one of
From $90 to $2.82 in that same timeline.
John, when we talk about competition, you have a particular approach which is kind of rare in the private sector. Can you tell us about your preferred method of supporting open access?
Certainly. So we have a fiber network where we don't care who you are. If you want to rent dark fiber from us, give us a call. We'll help you out with that, and we'll get you dark fiber in the downtown area. We believe that the infrastructure should be open access. And what I mean by that, it should be open to anybody, whether it's a public entity, a private entity, whether you're an ILEC, you're a CLEC, you're a Title II Broadband, whatever your label that you want to throw on, we don't really care. We're going to make our fiber available to you and have that available at reasonable, competitive, fair price points. And we've been very successful with that. We've got some very long-term agreements in place, and that dark fiber is energizing. And we've got competitors to our own retail business that are on our network, and we keep a Chinese wall between the two. We don't go after our other carriers' businesses that are on our fiber, and we're very, very meticulous about that. We think that if you really want to have a competitive environment, you need to have the infrastructure plant sort of as one entity, and all the service provider side is the other entity that uses that infrastructure plant.
Jory?
I think competitive environments are essential, especially in underserved areas. In Santa Monica, when we started in 1998, built our first system in 2002, there was no investments that had been made. And we started with an institutional network for the cities, the schools, and the college, and it rapidly grew. And we said, okay, we're done, and we're not going to go any further. We realized that there was no competition whatsoever. There's no incentive for anyone to invest in the community. And we needed to prime the pump. And the only way to do that was go beyond the institutional network and into the competitive business and anchor market, which we did. And I believe even to today that cities either need themselves to continue to provide that competitive market, either by continuing to expand their broadband networks or they need to bring in other service providers to do that for them, so that there are always continuous improvements. Spectrum, which was Time Warner in Santa Monica, was able to triple their speeds. Actually, they actually went from from 60 meg all the way up to 300 meg to the home, in response to the city having built CityNet, a fiber optic network that provided 100 meg, 1 gig, multiple gig, 10 gig, and 100 gig. Without that kind of network, without that competitive environment, there would have been no incentive for investments, and the community would not have seen any improvement, not only in bandwidth, but also in service.
Just one other quick data point with regards to competition. I encourage people, if you want to see a competition also at work, go look at the Lit San Leandro project up in San Leandro, California, right next to Oakland. Before that project started, you couldn't buy bandwidth there for less than $50 to $70 per megabit. In the public-private work relationship that Dr. Pat Kennedy and the community of San Leandro put together, all of a sudden now, your AT&T and your Comcast bandwidth is way down because there was a competitive choice. They built, through a public-private partnership, they built a dark fiber network that was now available, and the incumbents had motivation, had fiscal motivation to get out there and get pricing to a point that their customers were wanting and willing to pay. So competition is critically key.
So I'm going
There's
to
one
move
other
after
point.
this. Yeah.
One other point to be made, though, and that is, we help a number of clients, and the model isn't that they should build and operate their network. Santa Monica is a very unusual model, one among a few throughout the country, but a more typical model is that governments are actually aligning themselves in a public-private partnership with a service provider. Well, when we work with these communities, it is a much better outcome when we have multiple service providers bidding on the same backbone network and infill.
Right, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely want to come back to partnerships, but I want to flesh out one other thing, which is that for anyone who's in this space, if you have elected officials that are considering intervening in this market, you will hear that 5G is on the horizon, and that fiber is no longer necessary because everything's going to wireless. And I'll just say, I've only been around for 10 years, which is less than everyone else on this panel, working in this space. And when I started, I was told fiber was dumb because Wi-Fi was going to solve all our problems. And when that was obviously not the case, I was told that Wi-Fi was eclipsed by WiMAX, and that was going to solve all our problems. And then I was told, well, yeah, WiMAX, that was a belly flop, but we're going to have this 4G LTE everywhere, 100 megabits to everyone, every device. It's going to be great. That has not played out. It took me 35 seconds to download a 10 megabit picture of my child last night over LTE. And so now we're hearing 5G. Now, Matt, you have your microphone up, but I also want to turn, you have experience with millimeter waves, John, so I want to make sure we talk about that as well. So, Matt.
Well, I just wanted to make the comment that I've been running a wireless network, a fixed microwave wireless network since 2001 with a team of people in Southern California, and it's called the Tribal Digital Village Network. And it is not the solution for delivering high capacity broadband to the home. I mean, yes, you can call it broadband based on today's standards of broadband, but as we exponentially grow the needs for pipe, if you will, or amount coming to the home, everything's going to be delivered over that one single pipe. Your entertainment, your connectivity to the world, your telephone communications, all of those things are going to come through that. And as that need grows, and video and things get higher definition, the communication deserts, if you will, are going to be left behind yet again, because our solution at the moment is to solve that by wireless because of geography, cost, things like that, deploying to the fiber to the home on the reservations, and they're very remote and they're very difficult terrain to deal with. Not to mention there's issues with, we've been put on locations not exactly chosen by us, and the records and the burials and the artifacts and things like that, there's a lot of issues when you dig the ground. So, there's some issue with laying fiber underground. So there's plenty of options there that cause problems for tribes that wouldn't cause trouble in other situations. But fixed wireless is a great solution as an interim. It's sometimes a great endpoint solution, but all of that backhaul has to happen on fiber. There is no way to bring that much data back and forth If you drive out in rural America and you have LTE and you drop to 3G, that 3G site doesn't have fiber. They are unable to backhaul, and that's why you went to 3G. So it is a stopgap. It is a solution when there isn't any, but it is not the end solution.
Did you want to just talk a little bit about the millimeter, and then I want to talk to John about why his preference is for fiber over a wireless solution before we move on?
Certainly. You mentioned the comment of, well, hey, 4G is going to solve that, or hey, WiMAX is going to solve all of our problems. I've been doing computers and technology since 1976 when I was in 4th grade, and I look over the timetable from then to now, and I can tell you that we used to think 64 kilobytes of RAM was all the RAM we were ever going to need in our computer. And look where we are today. We've got to buy an iPhone that has 128 gigs of RAM because we can't store enough. So anyone that comes to me and says, well, hey, this is the next silver bullet, I'm already going, well, wait a minute. You haven't looked at this long enough. I think that fiber and wireless are a great match, and they are a great match in a hybrid type for deployments. There are reasons why wireless is a great solution. We're looking at millimeter wave. We're doing some millimeter wave deployments now because the cost of getting that fiber to a customer far exceeds what the current revenue, 1 year, 3 year revenue picture looks like. And we need to get the customer up and running now. So it's a time to market, it's a speed to market, customer acquisition kind of a situation. And so we're looking at those wireless technologies to be able to deploy very rapidly and get the bandwidth out and get that customer up and running. Our ultimate goal is to be able to come back in down the road and try to fill in those areas with fiber and then push from those points out with more millimeter wave or more wireless, whether it's licensed or unlicensed spectrum. And we're keeping a really tight look at the CBRS stuff and the things that are going to change in the 365 world coming up here this year and next year. So I think that at the end of the day, my job is to push packets, and I don't really care. I'm transport medium agnostic. My job is to get my customer packets really well, whether it's fiber or wireless, whatever one's going to work and work reliably, and reliability is a key point there. That's what I'm interested in.
What distance between are you placing your radio equipment for millimeter wave technology in the home?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch
What distance between the radio equipment and the home?
So we're only doing millimeter right now for commercial, and so that's going up on top of the roof, and then we run a cable into the building. We haven't done millimeter yet for residential. We've been doing typically 5 gig Wi-Fi-ish frequency band. Your typical brand U, brand C, brand X product.
Did you want to address the wireless, or should we move back to the challenges of working with others?
Yeah, so this will sound sort of counterintuitive or counter to what people usually say about rural areas, which is wireless is less efficient in rural areas, less effective. These are long-term investments. These are long-term, large-scale infrastructure projects, and they ought to be viewed as such. Wireless, and we're talking about 2 different sort of versions of wireless even on this panel. There's mobile wireless. When you say 5G, most people are referring to mobile wireless. Mobile wireless is not a substitute today for fixed line usage at the home. The average home, the growth in the usage in the average home over the last decade grew 100-fold. Grew from less than 2 gigabytes a month for the average home to 150, 200 gigabytes a month, and there are people that use a terabyte or more a month. Wireless networks are not designed to handle that kind of traffic. The way they're designed is to offload traffic onto wireline networks, that is to say, Wi-Fi networks. Some 70% today, some 70% of the data carried used by mobile devices, like this one I can't get out of my pocket, but 70% of the data used by mobile devices is carried on a wireline network, not a wireless network, carried by a Wi-Fi network, which is a wireline network. That's pretty much the same as when there were 3G networks. In fact, it's a bit of an increase if there were 3G networks. Don't expect that 5G networks will mean that people are going to use 5G networks instead of Wi-Fi, that is to say wireline networks. The more people use mobile devices, the more they use wireline network. That's the part, wireline networks, that's the part that sounds counterintuitive, but the reason is to run a wireless network, you need fiber. You need fiber as deep into a network as you can get, and the more people use mobile devices, the more they want to use, the more capacity they want to use, and the more offload you'll have onto wireline networks. So I'm not saying, it's not a substitute, it's a complement to everything everybody knows they use today. People don't give up their home service and just use their mobile service unless they can't afford it, which gets to Commissioner Clyburn's point. The vast majority of people who say they are mobile-only users can't afford a good connection at home, or they can't get a good connection at home because they live in a rural area. As a nation, we use both. The two types of networks are integrated. They're not separate types of networks. They're not two-track networks.
Chris, I can't agree more with what everyone said, but in urban areas, it's a little bit different. There's a complement between 4G, 5G, and Wi-Fi, and how cities actually will deploy and use those technologies. So what we're all talking about is moving packets of data. And the demand just continues to increase as people go mobile. And as more people go mobile, more people need wireless. And to support that, obviously, more wireline. When they're in the home, wireline makes a lot of sense. Cities actually need to look at continuing to get companies to invest in 4G, 5G network deployments. And there's a whole discussion that we can have about pole attachments and leveraging those government assets. But more importantly, besides what the companies, the wireless service providers will invest, cities need to invest in Wi-Fi as well, because Wi-Fi is a tremendous complement to wireless. Take, for example, when you go to the LA Marathon, don't expect to be able to be uninterrupted and expect to be disconnected when you're in a crowd of 150 to 200,000 people and all you're relying on is the private service network. Cities augment that using Wi-Fi, and it becomes an extremely effective tool to prove that these devices actually are mobile and that they can be used pretty much anywhere.
Same goes with Comic-Con.
So for people who, I don't know if the mic caught it, but he said same goes for Comic-Con. He's a Comic-Con veteran of many years. So talking about, each one of you I think has something to say about, looks like he's not the only one. Each one of you has things to say about working with partners. Now, Jory, I want to be a little provocative and say, in my experience, a lot of cities that built municipal networks historically started off wanting to find a partner, could not or did not like the terms of the agreement, they ended up doing it themselves. I don't know that there are a ton of partners around. So I think we can talk about that for a second. And then John has been someone who's tried to be a partner of cities, and we can talk a little bit about where you feel like there could be improvements from a municipal side when you're preparing to work with someone. So Jory, do you want to respond? Because I feel like there is a lack of partner availability. It's kind of like Russia following World War II. There's just a lot more of one sex looking for a partner, and you have a challenge to find those suitors, I think.
Well, unfortunately, except in rare situations where cities actually build an infrastructure and then have an open architecture and actually an open system to invite competition and people to play, you normally have a competitive environment between the regulator, which is the city that's immediately in an adverse position or really role in negotiations with the private carrier. The service provider is trying to make money, and the cities are actually trying to make sure that they are protecting the assets that the public has invested in. And those don't mesh really well. And so the bigger issue that I'm finding, and I wanted to ask this question to Clyburn, was that when monies are and these networks are funded, there should be something which is looked at from each of the communities or the areas in which the build is going to take place. And that is how to satisfy or break down some of these barriers between the public agencies and the service providers by finding a middle ground, by being able to come up with one standard rate for a pole attachment, be able to say that there will be digital inclusion included in the deployment for with those funds, and so the city's needs will be met. There'll be municipal assets that will be connected, and anyway, the story goes on and on. I can keep saying about how we can bring them together, but something has to bring them together, and right now it's just how much how much are we going to get them to give us for that pole or our conduit or our fiber, and the service providers is how much money are we going to be able to make. And there are no standards. It's really a negotiations and an open field for cutthroat, I think, agreements.
Now, John, I want to get a sense from your perspective. I want to preface this by two different conversations that I experienced. One was City of St. Louis Park, which is getting fiber to the home from a local provider in the Minneapolis area, US Internet, which is one of the most highly rated. I mean, it's right up there with Sonic in terms of, I'm sure, your ratings as well, for being loved by its customers. They went to St. Louis Park and said, we'd like to build out to your city of 50,000. And St. Louis Park said, well, here's the sheet for access to our fiber on our arterials. You sign here, and it's more or less done. We went to the city of St. Paul, where I live, and I'm very active in trying to get some sort of fiber to my house. And the CIO said, well, yeah, why don't you make us an offer? And then I'll take it to council, and then we'll talk about it, and this, and then that, and then maybe it'll happen, and I can't show you maps of where conduit is. Like, those are two different experiences on the edge of the continuum, I'd say. What kind of guidelines can you offer to a city when you are dealing with them, John?
I would say that if you have a private sector entity come to you and say, hey, we want to save you lots of money forever, and we would like to partner with you on being able to intelligently cut your road once and build out a fiber network that's going to be open access. And here are the bullet points that we plan and pledge that we will adhere to. I think that at that moment in time, the municipality really should step up and seriously engage and actually identify who is going to be the champion on the inside of that municipality to help push that through.
Or also, I would say, to verify it. I would say the terms that I've seen you offer, and we've gone back and I was kind of confused and thinking, I don't know this guy. He might be getting ready to sell the network off in 2 years. And so I would say when you get those sort of terms, you have to, not just someone to make it happen, but also someone that will find the expertise to verify that it is a good deal.
Certainly, and I think that part of that comes down into the negotiations, and for us to address that concern of, hey, we're going to build this thing and flip it, well, that's a contractual issue. That's something that can be negotiated and put into the contractual obligations between the two parties, the municipality and the partner, private sector partner. And it says that, hey, this is what we're agreeing to, and these terms survive and carry on to successors of interest in this network. So if you do sell it and flip it to the big evil empire, they're stuck with it as well. And those are, to me, that's just a contractual matter that the lawyers get to argue over for a couple of hours, and then we're done.
So from the tribal perspective and from my experiences in the last 16 years of this, we didn't have any option for partners. We looked for support and partnership in the rural communities, and there was no ROI visible to the incumbents, and they didn't see a value in building any infrastructure to us. So our partners came from the universities, from the HP REN, the High Performance Wireless Research and Education Network, who was our original mentor, Hans Werner Braun, sat down and taught us how to network radios together and said, go play on the mountains. And so we learned from experience and decided that this was something that we had to take on ourselves. Glad we did it and are where we are, but partnerships can make it a lot easier. And I think moving forward, as we are now stepping into that fiber realm and working with these companies, I feel that there's a little bit different atmosphere, and some of those companies are a little bit more eager to support the project now that they're a part of the project.
So I want to ask John a specific question related to this, but I wanted to warn you all. I encourage you to come up to the microphones at this point. We'll start interspersing some questions into our dialogue. So if you have questions, please come to the mic. The harder a question you ask, the better. The briefer a question you ask, the better. So please come and ask us hard, brief questions. John, you are a supporter of not just electric membership corporations, co-ops, however you want to call them, doing this, but also them doing it themselves and not necessarily partnering with an ISP that happens to be nearby. Why do you think it's important for them to do it themselves? And I don't know if that's categorical or if I'm just, tell me if I'm wrong.
So mostly what you said is right.
It's usually the case.
Right. You are lamenting diversity of the gender on this panel. I'll give you a diversity of view. I'm not a big fan of partnerships. I think partnerships is kind of a squishy term for contracts. You do something with a contract, fine. What I tell the electric co-ops I work with mostly is you should reduce as many dependencies in this project as you can. You should be as independent as possible. Now, again, my audience, when I'm talking to electric membership co-ops, I'm talking to people who live in areas where the population density is 4 or 5 homes per mile, where nobody came to build an electric system for them in the 1930s or 40s. They did it for themselves. So when I say you should do it for yourself, it resonates with them because they'll wait an awfully long time to find a partner. I'm not against partnerships in the abstract, but my main point to the electric co-ops is you should protect your members. These are large-scale investments. They're $50 or $100 million investments for small communities, and you should make sure that your electric members are protected. And the way you protect them is there's 2 aspects to the way we model these systems. There's a cost to build a system, and there's a cost to operate. And I say if you can find an operator that's willing to pay you a dark fiber lease that fully pays for the cost to build over time, then that's a good arrangement. But don't wait for it, because they're not that complicated to operate. So then do it yourself. Don't be dependent on somebody else. Don't wait for somebody else, because that wait is going to be a long, long time.
And Jory, did you have a final comment? Do you have a final comment before we go to the questioner?
No, it's okay.
Please ask your question.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks to this panel. It's been a very interesting discussion. My name is Chris Kennedy. I'm the Broadband Project Director for Region 10 in Colorado, which is a consortium of 6 counties that are banding together, the counties and their 17-member communities, to build middle-mile fiber connections in rural southwestern Colorado. I also serve on the Grand Junction City Council, so I live, eat, and breathe broadband on a daily basis. Question I have, and I wanted to raise this earlier when the commissioner was here, and it's really about the rural co-ops and the infrastructure that they already have in place, namely fiber that they use for operations. Yes, we still have this new build. We still have to get more fiber deployed. But one of the biggest barriers for the rural co-ops to participate in being this broadband solution are the perfection of easements that they have to accomplish in order to deliver commercial services. Fiber can be abundant and deployed, but until we can find ways to work with those co-ops to get those easements perfected for commercial use, and we're not talking building any other infrastructure or adding any fiber to already existing plant, but we can't get into those partnerships or the contracts in IRU and F-Fiber until we solve that issue. So I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas about an approach from a policy perspective that can ease that, I'll use the word burden, in getting those easements perfected in a better way.
Thanks. Do we have any answers?
Well, I can tell you the approach that one of our clients in Delta Montrose Electric Association used in perfecting their easements. So we wrote a business plan for them. They've built, it's still in the process, they built their first phase, that is their pilot project, and now they've moved on to building the other phases. So there isn't a question, by the way, as to whether an electric co-op can put fiber on its network and use it for electric purposes, including broadband purposes. What Delta Montrose decided to do was to go home by home, member by member, sit down with them, explain what the project was, explain what they wanted to do, and have the member, or in some cases, because where you're building doesn't always mean everyone's a member of the association, have them agree. Now it's a laborious process. It did involve everyone in the community. They were successful in that approach, and I think it's one approach is you explain to everybody the benefits, you explain what the project is. You'll still have people who are reluctant. You'll still have you'll have personalities come into play. You'll have people who don't like their neighbor and they don't want their neighbor to have service. You'll have a lot of things pop up, but that approach that is telling people what you're trying to do and get them to agree and get them to sign that piece of paper worked in Colorado in the one case that we worked with it.
And I think one of the things we've seen in other successful community-based projects is that kind of outreach is important for success, and it shows a respect for the people that are going to be involved in the project. So there's reasons to do that even if you don't have to perfect your easements. Question, please.
I'm really excited to hear you talk about the electric co-ops and kind of spearheading getting the broadband out to the rural communities. We see so many similarities between electric service 100 years ago and internet service today. So who better to spearhead that than a co-op? But one of the questions that I have is actually for Jory. And you mentioned there's no standards for these pole attachment fees, for franchise agreement, percentages. That's one of the issues that we're facing in Mississippi. We actually have an electric co-op who's partnering with a contractor to expand their fiber, and when they're going city by city, they're running into roadblocks. What is the best way, in your opinion, to implement these standards? Is it a city by city thing? Is it a statewide thing? Is it a federal thing? And what are some cities that Mississippi could look at, or some states that Mississippi can look at to benchmark against?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the best model would be the federal government working with the states and getting the states to approve a standard that would be agreeable to the regions within the state. In absence of that, another model that I've been deploying is within regions, and I work predominantly in the state of California, working with cities in regions and as collectives to agree upon various standards for pole attachment rates, for dark fiber leasing, and for working cooperatively together to come up with a standard approach to wireless policies for pole attachments for the wireless carriers, for dig once policy, and for public right-of-way policy. So in some of these areas where I've done work or I've been able to be influential, you'll find a standard, a full set of standards, and you'll see these cities deploying these rate structures, and they've been accepted already by the wireless providers, and it does end up having a wireless policy, a dig once policy, public right-of-way policy, and a standard license agreement streamlines the process.
Just to add to that, if I may, I believe, and I may be incorrect on this, but I believe that the FCC in 2011 had a publication that came out that talked about, from the federal level, pole attachment pricing cost equations for whether or not you were a broadband provider, cable provider, or a hybrid. These are what, at the FCC level, this is what you should be paying for make-ready and attachment rental fees, et cetera. And I'm pretty sure I still have that slide deck available, so if you want to see me afterwards, I'll be happy to, we'll swap emails and I'll get it to you.
And this is a good moment to note that Next Century Cities is a member-driven organization, and so we're constantly looking for what our members find really important. And so if there are things like that where, in particular, you would benefit from collective action of multiple communities sort of looking at this, making it a priority, I hope that your community would join Next Century Cities and push for it. And as we get more members that are saying, hey, this is something that's useful to us, we would do that. We just released a policy brief that focuses on a number of issues that our communities have raised up, from urban area competition issues to pole attachment issues to wireless and obviously preemption. So I'll just make that pitch for people to join Next Century Cities and then push us to help you answer these questions.
Quick question. Do we have those same kind of existing things for rural? Like Jory's talking about. I know you've developed a lot of it with the work you've done, but is there a reference that we can give that points people towards rural kind of standardization?
Well, Next Century Cities has a number of rural communities, I mean, many small communities, some rural. Some counties have joined. I don't know if any of them are rural offhand, but that's an option as well for those areas. And then my organization, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, we'd be happy to look into those sorts of things and centralize those as well. So
consider yourself tasked.
Okay.
Hi there. My name is Zeke Kelly. I have no fancy title. I'm more of a concerned citizen, but I've been hearing a lot about roadblocks in the infrastructure and getting things set up in rural areas. But you were mentioning how you had a mentor and you were able to set things up yourself. Is there a way that more of those mentors can come to light and kind of educate more rural areas and help them get on their feet self-sufficiently?
So you're referring to the comments? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's so few of us, and we're at things like this today. I'm like, I guess, mentoring the next phase. I'm trying to help the next group of people. When tribal communities come with us or come to us, or rural communities come to us, we don't hold back. We share the information. It's not something that we feel is proprietary, and we try to educate and help as much as we can. But there aren't that many people in the rural communities doing this. So, and the other problem with that is we're so busy on the ground actually getting the project done, because the project never ends, that I'm here and I'm not home working. So it's a balance. So it's got to be played well throughout the year so that you're not wasting the company's time and money and the effort that's actually going on the ground. But we're more than willing to have people come to us and learn by experience as well. So grab my card after.
John, and then Jory.
Yeah, so one of the things I've had the unique privilege of seeing, again, looking at history over a long cycle, is back in the 90s, we had this thing that came out of the ground called the internet, and it was really cool, and everybody was really excited and hyped by it. We were doing dial-up, and then we sort of started doing this thing called DSL, and we had frame relay, and we had all these other technologies, and I'm seeing a lot of the same repeat. Same kinds of challenges, same kinds of questions, same kinds of things that we all addressed in the 90s about access and competitive, et cetera. So we're seeing a lot of this cycle. And what I would say for anybody that's looking for help and for mentors and so forth is, one, get my business card. I'm a cheap date. So I'm always willing to help and share my knowledge. I don't necessarily need to see an economic gain for it personally. I'm willing to pass on that info. Number two is there are plenty of other like-minded organizations that are working together, and I would get involved with those organizations as well and see what they're doing and get out there. There's plenty of people that are willing to help. I think the biggest thing is you just got to have enough courage to get up and say, hi, I need some help. And I think anybody in this room would be willing to help anybody else get up there and figure out how to do something and build a better mousetrap.
This doesn't address your question for non-urban areas, but the City of Santa Monica has had a program now in existence called the Youth Tech Program, and we launched that 5 years ago. We've put over 150 to 200 youth through the program to actually train them to be champions in broadband and in technology, and to actually foster the development of apps and companies that give back to the community. So it's a citizen-based or government-based app that benefits either public safety or intelligent transportation and mobility, health and or education. And the model exists. If you go to smgov.net, it's on the website. It's a really good model. And Deb, one day, I'd like to recoin the group and the program to Next Century City Champions.
Paul, I just wanted to add one comment, and then we'll take your question. And that's that, I've been very lucky to be working in this field for 10 years. I would say that I'm much more obsessive than I am intelligent. And one of the things that I think people sometimes look at in this field is like it's very technical, there's a lot of special words, it's this and that. Almost everyone that's coming up in this space is self-taught one way or another. And one of the things we see from communities is not that they come from a wealthy community, it's not that they come from a community that has the right co-op nearby, those sorts of things help. What happens is there's someone who just doesn't let this die. Someone we've often had on stage before is Mark Erickson from RS Fiber in Minnesota. And here's a person who, with several other people in his community, he's bringing fiber to the home to these farms in this area, having created the first fiber co-op that I'm aware of, certainly the first one in rural areas, which was a co-op that was created out of nothing just to do fiber. And it happened because they didn't stop when they tried year after year, and they kept hitting roadblocks for trying to figure this out. They just kept going, and they tried different things, and eventually they made something that worked. And so I would just make a pitch that don't think this isn't something that you could do or be a champion of in your community, because it just takes a little bit of work. I think John just leaned forward, and then Matt, and then we'll really get to you, Paul, I promise.
I just wanted to echo what you're saying, which is, again, when I address groups that would make decisions about investing, I usually say there's no obstacle to the technology. There's no risk to the technology. GPON networks, fiber networks, they work, they deliver services. That's not the obstacle. There's no obstacle to the financing. I don't have any difficulty raising money for any of these projects and never have. There's no obstacle to the risk, to the question of, well, will people subscribe to the service? It doesn't matter where you are. People choose high quality service so long as you can make it affordable. The obstacle tends to be leadership or lack of leadership. These projects work when somebody steps up and takes a hold of it and is determined to see it all the way through. There's no substitute for that.
And to tie into that, I'm a recovering graphic designer, and I'm now a director of technology. And just like John said, it's like once you get a hold of something that you're passionate about, you see it through to the end.
Paul?
So I wanted to go back to the issue of, say, standardized pole attachment rules or ways to sort of streamline the process for getting networks built out, which I fully support. The problem I see is, especially at, say, the Sacramento legislature, those policies very quickly transform in ways for incumbents to avoid engaging with communities they're moving into or offering service in, putting up infrastructure wherever they want, and essentially shifting the cost from the carrier to communities who now, say, have a bunch of ugly antennas to look at. So how do you draw the line? How do you prevent that kind of abuse?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't something that would be handled at the state level. It should be handled also at the local level, but there can be some standards that are set. But there still needs to be dialogue, and I strongly believe in working with cities in California mostly for developing these wireless policies and these ordinances. And these ordinances are getting passed, and that gives them a voice, and they still are able to regulate. And the planning departments still have the conditional use process. The CUPs and the public works directors are working in tandem with them for how the public right-of-way is used, and also traffic signal plans and the rest. It doesn't have to preclude the ability of the local government to develop and administer policy and ordinance.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we would generally be talking about from our perspective is voluntary standards. I recognize that there are some cities out there that get in the way, either through, they may have a variety of reasons, from ignorance to, someone who is a municipal employee who's trying to build a little kingdom for him or herself. These things happen. I think from my point of view, one of the things we're really trying to work on is cities that get it. And City of Lincoln, whenever I talk with them about how they streamline the ability for 5G, which is a subject there'll be a breakout group in which you can learn more about that if you're interested. One of the first things I would always say is, like, we want to make sure that this technology comes to us first. We want to make it early. If you're living in a community where that sort of spirit isn't happening, you should be pushing for it. You should be making sure that your city doesn't view, the incumbent as an enemy. The incumbent shouldn't view cities as enemies, and I think we need to find ways of working together across that on a number of these issues, but I think voluntary standards are important.
I think we should also move away from just, a municipality should work with any of the providers, whether they're the incumbent, they're a competitive provider, they're the new entrant, or the next new entrant into the community. The municipality, from a public policy perspective, should be there to work with whoever steps up to the stage and wants to affect a positive change to that community. And I think it's important. And if, in the case the incumbent doesn't want to do that, then the incumbent will learn from a competitive process that they probably should have.
We have a question?
Just real quickly, Mark, comment. My name is Andrew Gonzalez. I'm with Kit Carson Electric Cooperative. So in hearing all these, comments with perfections of right-of-ways, pole attachments, I think as a member-owned cooperative, that's just what it is, right? Your membership owns you. So it's not an investor-owned utility that's governed by a board of directors or investor-owned, right? So we follow the National Rural Electric Co-op Association for guidelines with what pole attachment fees should be. Secondly, the New Mexico Rural Electric Co-op Association also has bylaws and guidelines that help us through that process. So Kit Carson Electric deployed a $64 million FTTH project, and I'm going to take an opportunity to throw a cheap plug because I'll be speaking on one of the breakout sessions this afternoon, and I'm happy to meet with anybody because in going through this iteration of this process, that's the exact same thing we encountered, right? How do you perfect the right-of-ways, especially through tribal lands or through Native American? And I think the easiest way to do that is to engage. Public engagement is a huge part of it, but I think also giving the benefactor back and delivering a clear message, the economic development opportunities that come out of projects like this are really the driving force, right? Broadband, I don't know one political entity or one political individual, red or blue, independent, whatever it is, that has or can negate delivering high-quality broadband services to low income, number one, but number two, to the educational facilities. So again, it's compelling to hear the direction that this has taken, in the sense of pole attachments and right-of-ways and how they impact broadband delivery through municipalities. I think municipalities hold the largest key, even if they don't have, direct ownership of the poles, right? They can control through franchise. So it's either incumbent providers or electric co-ops or investor-owned utilities allow the municipalities to engage, to allow telco providers on there to deliver high speed through their communities, or increase franchise fees. It's
Go ahead, Matt.
simple.
I think what hearing from the tribal perspective from what you just mentioned, a lot of times the only information we get about a project that's coming through a tribal scenario is when they knock on the front door and say, "Hey, we're going to come through your land." It's not like, "Hey, we're thinking about developing this pipeline from here to there. We're going to come through this area. We're considering, your route on your tribal land being a pathway. Is this something we can work with you to provide services, and what services do you need?" And actually working with the tribal community as a partner or a contract or a just a relationship where you actually are coming to that community with the thought process prior to it being a done deal, and all you have to do is negotiate that easement across the tribal land and your job is done. The tribes want to be included. The tribes want meaningful consultation. The tribes want to be a part of that thought process and want to expand that community with you and have the opportunity to be in the development and think about their future as you're thinking about the future of your company. So please don't hesitate to knock on that tribal door early and often.
I think that comes back to we're all part of the same, we all have the same desires. And so whether you're working on tribal or you're coming across some small town that's not part of a tribe or what have, and you're working on building, you need to have that early engagement, you need to have that respect of that area, and you need to be able to get there and work with them and build a solution that's going to be beneficial to both. Because I think both parties in that equation are going to be able to offer things that are going to help and make that process smoother and easier. It's just your standard typical buy-in process that you want to do. You know, you're negotiating with an employee on a sales commission structure. Well, if you have the buy-in early on, then they're going to be willing to be part of that. So I think that we need to be encouraged to work with these communities across the board and get that buy-in early.
So I'd like to, as we're moving to finish, and if you have a question you can run up, we can still address it, but I want to ask a final question that I think provides some hope, and that's we live in a time in which politically we're incredibly divided. One of the things that I like working in this field is that we find that on the local level, and right now I'm thinking, Chris, why are you bringing politics back into this? We don't have to talk about politics. But I really like that we see Republicans and Democrats generally agreeing on a lot of these sorts of issues. One of the things that John has said in our conversations is that he doesn't know when he's out in these rural areas if he's talking to Republicans or Democrats. It doesn't come up. I like to use the example of Kansas City. Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas split. They have a history of fighting to death over companies that are switching back and forth, offering tax incentives. They had been constantly in competition. With Google Fiber coming to town, they started working together. Chattanooga has been spending money to try and have the right to serve its neighbors that don't have good access, rather than telling its neighbors to send all their jobs to Chattanooga. There's incredible potential here, and I see an incredible willingness across all kinds of lines, rural, urban, red, blue, to really work together. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing that as well, or if you have any messages of hope in a time in which many of us, I think, are afraid to open newspapers.
Wow.
A new hope?
So I was born in Washington, D.C. I still live inside the Beltway. Chris's comment about, don't bring politics up. I guess what I usually say about politics on this is there's plenty of issues that Republicans and Democrats can fight about, and this really doesn't need to be one of them. There's not except for the influence of money in politics, which does drive decision-making, which does drive positions that people take. That's what masquerades for policy, and that is at times what will make some of these decisions difficult, which is why when I said, be independent, don't rely on Washington, don't wait for a politician or anyone else to come and help you do this yourself. It's because, as hopeful as I'd like to be about this being a non-political issue, we're talking about big money industries, and big money industries means money in politics, and politics does drive the decision-making in Washington and in state capitals. So to the extent you can do this without involving any politician anywhere, you're better off.
So this is like an auction format where each person has to offer more hope.
That's a hope. Let me say.
No.
The difference
Good
between
advice.
that. This is the most hopeful message I can think of, because what I'm saying is this isn't up to somebody else. All of this is up to a local community. Unlike building a railroad, unlike building a highway, unlike building other forms of networks, the internet is a network in which you can build to an internet exchange point, and you can be on the internet just like everybody else, and that can be down to a local community level. You don't have to wait or ask permission of anybody else to do this. You can be part of the rest of the world no matter where you are by being on the internet. You can build to the internet by contract. You can connect to the internet from anywhere, and you don't have to ask Washington or the state legislature, mother may I, you can do this yourself. And I think that even when it comes to municipal building, which I think even where people say, oh, it's not permitted, I read those laws too, and I think it is permitted. I think that's the hopeful message. Don't wait for somebody. Do this yourselves.
And to piggyback on John's comment, the tribal communities are sovereign nations, individual sovereign nations. There's 567 federally recognized sovereign nations at the moment, and within that sovereign border, we have our own constitutions, our own governments, and self-governance is key. So standing up and building these networks and taking charge of this ourselves is within our rights, but the problem is the backhaul. We got to get the backhaul to get there. So we're going to have contracts and relationships to be able to bring the connectivity to us so that we can participate.
Well, wherever I go, there's always a mixed bag of my clients from a political perspective, Chris. But I do see, and I agree with you that they are unified when it comes to the value of broadband and being connected, a tech-savvy community, access to the internet, digital inclusion, tablets in the schools, and lots of tech jobs offered to those who are either graduating high school or coming out of college. What I do find interesting is that there's a little bit of politics still to be had, and that is in some areas, conservatism says, yes, this should be built, but it shouldn't be built with public funds. And in other areas, that is not an issue. And so right now it's playing out that these are being built, but they're different models. And we have to, like you said, accept those various models. And there will be contracts and there will be self-built systems. But I agree that everyone is moving in the same direction.
You wanna?
I think there is a new hope. Just to tie into the old Comic-Con thing as well. But no, I think we have as a nation, and I might even dare say as a world, as a planet, we have moved past where internet is a nice thing to have. It is now a required thing, and it's no longer just about surfing the internet. There are so many different apps that we use this thing called the internet for, and it's so critically important to everything from low income, disadvantaged families, kids that have developmental delays in the family, infant, toddler environment, needing medical assistance, telemedicine out in rural areas, the ability to get that information. It's no longer a luxury to have, it is a requirement. And so I think that Republicans and Democrats and independents and tea parties and coffee parties and blue parties and all of those folks, I think we all can really truly do agree that broadband is something we need to have today. What I think we need to do is we need to have policy that allows for both those communities that want to have their government build it, their community leadership build it. Hey, they voted for it. Let them do it. If you have private sector coming in at once and sees a business opportunity and it's reasonable, then have policies in place that make it relatively easy for that private sector company to come in and build and provide that service. Survival of the fittest will win out who wins or doesn't win there, right? If you provide a bad service, you're not going to have customers very long. But have those policies in place. In other words, sort of easily get out of the way and make this a lightly regulated, but allow us to be able to do that. I think there's a lot of changes happening. To John's statement, money is involved, politics is involved, big business is involved. We've got to figure out how to get past that.
Well, I'm going to ask you to thank our panel in a second, but first, directions. We have a buffet-style lunch behind you. There will be 2 lines, so if you see one long line and one short line, go to the short line. And then we're going to come back to the tables with the food, please, and we have about 20 minutes, I believe, until we have a keynote with Mayor Giles from here in Mesa and Congressman Andy Biggs. So please join me in thanking our panel today.
Thank you.